You are now listening to the Counterflow podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Lockhart, Texas. Beautiful, beautiful day here in Lockhart, Texas, and a wonderful interview I'm bringing you this evening. I'm so excited. I was able to get Abbot Tryphon on the show. I could not believe it when a friend of the show, Adam, and a friend of the show, and in real life, higher monk Mark, basically helped me hook this up. And so here we are. I've got Abbot Tryphon, someone I've been listening to for a couple of years now since I just became interested even in the Orthodox Church. I started listening to Abbot Tryphon, reading his blog, and the stuff they have over at his website for the Vashon monks, where he's a monk, obviously. The stuff they have for sale is really cool. They've got beard and mustache care, coffee mugs, and coffee, tea, icons, and a book even by Abbot Tryphon. So you should definitely check that out at vashonmonks.com. I'll link to that in the show notes page for this episode. But I should just tell you quickly about this wonderful man. Abbot Tryphon is the abbot of the Monastery of the All-Merciful Saviour, which was established in 1986 by Archimandrite Dimitri of blessed memory. I'm blessed and honored to have him on this show. Abbot Tryphon, welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Thank you. I am, for a man of my advanced age, I'm okay.
Well, I'm excited to have you here, and I've said that exact same thing to some people. And there might be an age difference between you and I, but maybe not too far. I'm honored to get you on here. Your homilies, I told you this offline, and your work has been instrumental in my journey towards orthodoxy. So I appreciate what you've done. And I will say, every time I hear them say, from Vashon Island in off off Washington State, I always picture, and then I see the videos. It looks amazingly beautiful up there where you're at.
It is.
Yeah, what a nice place.
You are surrounded by a forest on an island, and the island is surrounded by the Salish Sea. So it's about a 20-minute ferry ride to Seattle from here.
Okay. I heard you say on one of your recordings, you tend to avoid Seattle these days more so than you used to.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Seattle is kind of like Portland and San Francisco. It's a city to be avoided.
Yes, and it's sad because they used to be such beautiful areas, all three of those cities.
I know. I was a therapist in Portland, and it used to be my favorite city, and now I don't even go through there.
Well, before we get into this, I actually want to get into your background even prior to being a therapist, because I think there were some San Francisco days for you. I'll let you give an intro for my audience, whatever you think's pertinent, and then we'll jump into some things from there.
Well, I went to UC Berkeley for graduate school, and I'm still in recovery. While I was in Berkeley, I was radicalized, like most students seem to be on campuses today. I went there as a fairly conservative former Lutheran, and in short order, I became a member of the Central Committee of the Socialist Workers Party, which were Trotskyites.
Mm-hmm.
My whole life was so focused on political things at the time, and then when I moved to Portland for a position with a small college and as a therapist, I was an atheist, but there's always been different aspects of me. I was also an artist. I loved painting. I wanted to be a poet, but my poetry was so bad that I was thrown out of Greenwich Village, New York.
Really?
Yes, I moved to Greenwich Village, New York when I was about 22 with the idea of hanging out in coffee houses and places that the beatniks hung out at. I was too young to be a beatnik, but I really wanted to be a poet. And there was finally a a committee came to my apartment and ordered me out of the city because I was a terrible poet. So then I moved to Boston, and it was the coldest winter I ever experienced. And then I got together with a bunch of guys, and we drove a car across. There was a sign up in a coffee house wanting people to drive a car across the country. So we drove this car to Sacramento, and then I moved back to Berkeley. And that was sort of where I was until I finally moved to Portland to be part of a, oh, thank you. I don't need this. Brother Basil just brought me my Monastery blend coffee.
There you go. Okay, yeah, we should plug some of that at the end, by the way.
Yes, yeah. So anyway, at the time I moved to Portland, it was a beautiful city. It was called the Rose City, and it had a small downtown block, smaller than most cities. It had more fountains and parks than any other city in the country. And I was, at the time, a long-distance runner, so there were all these forest trails above Northwest Portland on the Wildwood trails that I would run every day. And it had a thriving art community, and it had everything that I thought I wanted. But I remember I was at a cocktail party, and I was talking to two members of another department, and one of them told the two of us that he said, I don't know how I'm going to take this. I've got 3 years till I retire, and I'm bored out of my mind. I haven't had a student that's inspired me in years. And the other guy said, oh, do what I do. I set out to destroy every belief system my students came to class with. And the other guy said, oh, what a great idea. I'm going to start doing that. And I took my cocktail and walked away. And I went up to a friend from my department, and I told him what I had just heard. And he said, well, I hate to tell you this, but he said, there's a lot of faculty members that have the same attitude. And I just decided then that I wanted to really rethink what I was going to do with my life. I had a cabin on the Oregon coast in a town called Cannon Beach. And so what I did is every Friday I would leave for Cannon Beach, and I'd go running on the beach and buy a bottle of wine and I'd do a steak on my barbecue, and I would read British novels all weekend. I didn't want anything to do with psychology or therapy or anything like that. I didn't even want to get to know people in the town because it was my downtime for bringing myself back in order. And finally, I asked for a sabbatical, and somebody in my department had already asked for one, but had taken the request back. So I was given their slot. So I bought a VW bus, having been a 60s hippie. And I bought it from some hippies, and it had peace signs and flowers painted on the side. And I put everything, I just packed everything up, and I got a tent and sleeping bag, and I hit the road, and I spent most of that 8 months in Big Sur, California.
Wow. Yeah, it's beautiful there.
And about every 2 weeks, I'd go into Berkeley and spend time with old friends. And all of my time was spent basically running and reading. And the only book I took with me on the journey was Siddhartha's Steppenwolf. And I just felt like I was on a spiritual journey, and I had nothing. There was nothing there. I was practicing Zen Buddhism at the time, but that left me hollow. And because I was not the type of person who liked sterile environments, whenever my Buddhist friends came over to visit me, they were always a little stunned at the photos and the paintings and the books that I had everywhere and the clutter. So I knew that I really ultimately didn't fit in with Zen Buddhism. But I was tired of being angry. I was very politically involved at the time with the Socialist Workers Party. And there was so much stress around the people that I had to work with and my fear that I would become like them, that I really, by the time the beginning of the 7th month of my sabbatical, I decided that I still didn't know what I was going to do. So I drove in, I was going to head to Berkeley for a few days. And on my way, I stopped at a place called Cliff House on the end of Gary Boulevard in San Francisco, one of my favorite restaurants.
I've been there.
And I went in there and had an early dinner. And then I was driving, it was a Saturday, and I was driving up Gary Boulevard, and off to my left was Holy Virgin Joy of All Husaro Cathedral. And I had gone in there once as a graduate student with a girlfriend. And I was totally blown away by the interior of that church. In fact, that's the church that Father Seraphim Rose experienced. And his account of how he experienced that interior of that cathedral was very similar to what I experienced. And so I asked the man at the candle stand what time the liturgy or the service was on Sunday, and he told me. And so I show up, and it was a hierarchical liturgy with the late Archbishop Anthony. And I was totally slain by what I saw. It was, I had the answer to a question that I had asked my Lutheran minister when I was 10 years old, after we had studied the Old Testament temple. I said, why did God of the Old Testament care so much about how he was worshipped, but he doesn't seem to care now? And the pastor's response was, well, they were under the old covenant, we are under the new covenant. And I remember thinking as a 10-year-old, what a lame answer. And so here I am, standing in this Orthodox cathedral for the very first time for a service. And the bishop is in the middle of the cathedral on a raised platform, and there were 2 groups of priests that were fanned out from him facing each other. And the senior priest went up and kissed his hand and took a blessing, and he went in through one of the deacon's doors. And a few moments later, the veil opened and the royal doors opened. And for the very first time, I witnessed the Holy of Holies. And I knew that the God of the Old Testament does care about how he is worshiped, and here it is. And it was like I had experienced Christianity for the first time. And so I basically, as I left that church, I wanted desperately to talk to somebody, but everybody was piously kissing icons and then leaving. But in God's divine providence, it happened that there were 2 monks there, and they were standing in the narthex talking to some people. And I went up to them and I said, would you have a moment? Could I ask you some questions? And they said, yes. So I engaged them in conversation, and they invited me to their monastery for Vespers that night. And then we had a meal there, and I met the other monks, and I just knew this is for me. This is for me. And so I went back to Big Sur, and I composed 2 letters of resignation, one to the college and one to the clinic. And I didn't tell them what I was going to do, because my experience on both levels was that, in both institutions, was that Christianity was the basis for most psychological problems.
Wow.
And I'm going to give them the pleasure of discussing me at cocktail parties. So I just basically walked away. And it wasn't until many, many years later, when I stopped into Portland on my way back from San Francisco to our monastery on Vashon Island, and I stopped into the home of an old friend of mine. It was an elderly couple that I had rented a room from between college and graduate school. And I just stopped in to say hello. And my friend Nestor said, well, first of all, he wanted to know, what are you?
Yeah.
Then I was a monk. And I explained to him, and he said, well, we always wondered what happened to you. And then that following Sunday, he was at his Unitarian church. And by the way, I had always told him, if I was a Unitarian, I would sleep in on Sunday mornings and go out for a newspaper and a cup of coffee instead of standing there singing hymns to a God that may or may not exist. But anyway, so he went to his Unitarian church, and he told an old friend of mine, Jerry, who was a member of the Unitarian church, that I had just visited them. And he said he's a former psychologist. And Jerry said, well, what was his name? Well, it turned out that Jerry and I were in the same clinic together.
Oh, wow.
And we were in the same college together. And Jerry didn't get tenure, even though he was the most popular professor on the campus. But he was short, heavy set, big beard, big hair, wore blue jeans, and Pendleton shirts and sport coats.
Okay.
So he did not fit the image of what they wanted. So when Jerry found out that was me, he said, well, we've always wondered what happened to him. So Jerry asked my friend if he would ask me to call him the next time I was in Portland. So I did, and Jerry and his wife had me over to dinner. And the first thing Jerry said was, you were such a great therapist, and you were known as one of the more intuitive of therapists. And all of a sudden you walked away, and we knew you didn't go anywhere else to do this because we didn't get any requests for, information about you. And so he said it was just kind of like, it really hit everybody really hard that you walked away from this career. And then I explained to him that the Orthodox Church sees itself as a hospital for the soul, and that the priests are the therapists. And then when I got back to the monastery, I sent him a copy of Orthodox Psychotherapy by Dorothea Rockos.
Yes, great book.
And Jerry called me about a week later, and he said, that's the most difficult book I've ever read. I'm on my second reading, and it's profound. And I see now that you didn't leave the profession.
Right.
And then I explained to him that, no, I left the religion of because that's how I saw it. So I have been giving thanks to God since that moment. I've never regretted the decision to leave my former profession. It's been a long time now. I've been a monk for over 40 years.
Wow.
And I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm kind of a broken down old guy. I can't serve liturgy anymore because of balancing problems. But I write my blog every day, and I do videos 3 or 4 times a week and short videos twice a week. And that's what gives me an opportunity to minister. I have been kind of building up for years because I've been doing my blog articles for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But at least the Lord, in His great mercy, gave me something that I could do even in old age.
Mm-hmm.
I even was in the hospital for my heart for about 3 weeks many years ago. And I had my monks bring me my laptop, and I still did my blog articles every day.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am.
My spiritual father is Father Turbo Qualls, and he's online.
I love him.
Me too. And
yes.
He's has a show online, and he said for a while he was hesitant to do some of the online type of things, but someone he knows, and forgive me, Father Turbo, if you're watching this for not remembering the name, said this new medium, the internet and social media and platforms such as YouTube are the new rooftops, and that we need people like Father Turbo, yourself. Do you see it as that same kind of way, a new way to evangelize, to reach a wider audience? Is that what you've experienced doing this?
Well, when I first started writing my blogs, I had read an article that said that the previous patriarch of Moscow, not the present one, but I'm trying to think of his name at the moment. Patriarch. Anyway, the patriarch told his bishops that if the church didn't use the internet, only the devil would use it.
Yeah.
And when I heard that, that's the moment I started. And my blog articles actually began in an odd little way. I had a young man who lives on the island, and he'd been attending the services. And when I was in Seattle, I stopped into his office. He was a high-tech guy. I stopped in to say hello. And I walked in, and there's, it was a big room full of little cubicles. And he was sitting in one of these little gray-toned cubicles. And then he had a tiny little icon card that he had there, but he said he couldn't keep it there. He had to put it up every day because the boss didn't want it. And he said, and he was also told recently that the boss didn't want his Bible in that room. He said, there's no place for religion here.
Wow.
And never mind, there was a Muslim woman who was, looked like a Muslim woman. But he was told, no, you can't do this. And so what I did is I said, well, you know what I'll do? I said, are you allowed to take on or to read your emails every day? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I will copy the scripture readings for the day and the saints of the day, and I will email it to you so you can read it online. And then I started posting photos because his office was so bland. I figured he needed to have a little greenery from the island here.
Uh-huh.
And so I did that. And then he had me add some other people that were interested. So I started adding others, and it kept getting more and more and more people. And finally, he had there was this, how do I put it? He had more and more people wanting to be signed up for this.
Oh.
And so it got up to maybe 20 people or something like that. And then one of my friends, I was standing at a coffee stand on the island, and I happened to mention to this friend that I've been doing this. And he said, well, at some point, you're going to be seen as spam.
Oh.
And will be taken down. Why don't you do a blog? And I said, well, what's a blog? And he said, well, I'll show you. So he showed me his blog, and then he set up my first blog. And that's where I've been ever since. I've been doing this, and now I have, anybody who's interested in it, it's abbottryphon.com. ABBOTRYPHON.
Got it. We'll link to that for sure.
And that's where people can find everything I do, basically.
You were, to find orthodoxy like you did in the cathedral, much like you mentioned Father Seraphim Rose did, it's such a quick jump to say, wow, I met with these monks, and then I decided this was for me. Having been this kind of, I don't want to call you angry, but within an angry political scene, the socialist movement, the Bay Area hippie culture, that was like a massively hotbed. The area is famous for that still to this day. When I remember leaving San Francisco on election day of 2016, we all know what happened. This is before the results came about, but I saw booths of socialists in the street, like passing out socialist information. And I thought, my goodness, this place is far left. Like, I'm from Texas. Even in Austin, you wouldn't really have socialist booths and stuff handing out information. That's crazy. But when you first got into orthodoxy, having come from that scene, was there a struggle within? Did you have to burn off some of the parts that maybe shouldn't be there? What was that like?
Well, first of all, the beginning of the end for me of the Socialist Workers Party was I was in downtown Portland. I had a bullhorn, and I was leading about 1,000 people through the streets of downtown Portland to go to where the federal building is. And there was an attorney, a woman that was with me. And when we got to where the podium was in one of the park blocks, one of the parks that was across from the federal building, Holly and I kind of looked at the crowds, and they were still coming. It was going to take them quite a while to get there. And so we thought, well, we need to rally people. We need to keep them, the energy level up. So we both took turns giving spontaneous speeches. And at the next Central Committee meeting, both of us were called on the carpet about it, that we had given unapproved speeches. And we explained why we did it. That wasn't enough. They were like, you spoke, you didn't have the right to speak unless you had permission from the Central Committee. And by then, I was so tired of being angry.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally said, this is it. I'm out of here. And I just got up and I walked out. And I remember at the time that I had some friends that I had known in college. And periodically we would get together and maybe go to a coffee house or a bar in Portland. But I had a real chip on my shoulder. And I couldn't walk past a church, especially a Catholic church, without imaging in my mind the day that we were going to have a revolution and we were going to storm the church, drag out the priests, burn the church down.
Wow.
That was in my mind. So that was always there. And it was also, it even came out on the street. If I was walking with friends and somebody was coming in our direction, and it was like I would look at that person, daring them. Like, you want to screw around with me? Well, and I was weightlifting at the time, and I, running, but I had all this pent up anger. And I remember my friends finally confronted me and they said, you scare us. Someday you're going to either get us all shot or we're all going to be arrested because you're going to be tangling with somebody on the street. And I knew they were right. They were right. And I finally decided, I don't want to do that anymore. So I walked away from the party, but it took me a long time to get over the anger issues that I had. I don't even know where they came from. They were there. Mm-hmm. I think they actually came from Berkeley. Because I could remember being part of these big, massive riots on the campus and tear gas being sent our way by police and troops. And I can remember signs that I, was carried. I looked at today's young people, especially since this whole war that's going on in the Middle East, mm-hmm. and especially with those that are siding with Hamas. Mm-hmm. And it breaks my heart, but at the same token, I can relate to those young people because I was just like them, mm-hmm. just exactly like them. The difference is that in my day, and I'm 78 now, in my day, we still had an education.
Yes.
And even though Berkeley was one of the cornerstones for this new leftist woke mentality that spread across universities, we still understood history. Mm-hmm. And for instance, when I first moved to Portland, one of the things that I loved, I lived in an apartment on the park blocks, and right across just down the straightaways was this big statue of Abraham Lincoln. And then the next block down, there was a statue of Teddy Roosevelt on horseback. And these big bronze statues, beautiful statues. And it all contributed to this sense that you were living in England somewhere. Both those statues were torn down a few years ago, pulled down. Mm. There's a statue of a Civil War soldier in a historic cemetery that was pulled down, mm-hmm. with red paint poured on it. I look at that madness, the demonization of people like George Washington, and it's like these are young people who do not know history.
Right.
They don't know that under the Soviet Union, more people were slaughtered than any time in history.
Right.
Ever.
Yep.
And so when I see them rioting, I'm not pro-Israel and I'm not pro-Hamas. I think they're both wrong.
Yes.
But we don't ignore our history. And what I see happening in the United States is exactly what happened following the Bolshevik Revolution, when the statues of the historic figures that made the country were pulled down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why? It's like there's a neighborhood in Portland, the Fremont district, and someone bought this huge statue of Lenin.
Mm-hmm.
And he's kind of kneeling down and he's got a hand extended. And when I first saw that, it just gave me the creeps. Like, why would anybody buy that and set it into such a prominent place in this neighborhood? Somebody else thought the same thing because somebody started pouring red paint on the extended hand.
Oh.
So now I drive by there and I enjoy the fact that somebody knows what he did.
Yes.
But I look at these young people today. It was in the newspapers just recently that one of the big things, I think it's on TikTok, which if people knew where TikTok came from, they would understand. There's some Chinese in there maybe.
Yes.
But there's this TikTok thing about
Bin Laden.
Yes. And the letter that he wrote.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden he's being glorified.
Yes.
Like, oh, he was right on.
Yes.
And I saw on the news the other day a bunch of young people being interviewed about how he's changed their minds and he enlightened us. And I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding.
Right.
This guy was a terrorist and a murderer. But these are the same people that are lockstepping behind Stalin.
Yep.
Worse than Hitler.
Right.
Worse.
Yep.
And they're all essentially Nazis. I mean,
right.
Give me a break. But the problem is people don't understand history. They don't know history. And part of the problem, I think, is my generation. Because we were the ones that, I'm going to be raising my children to make their own decisions. And I'm not going to tell them what to do. I'm not going to set limits for them and so on. And now those children are raising children, essentially like my grandchildren, with a completely warped image of what our history is as a nation. Now, we, like everywhere, we have our faults. We have things in history that aren't the best. But it's like this is a democracy with freedom of religion. And yet today, on this island, for instance, we have about 12,000 residents on an island that's about the size of Manhattan, New York. It's 87% undeveloped forest.
Wow. I bet it's beautiful.
And it's gorgeous. And I got together with a Catholic priest who's a dear friend of mine and this Methodist minister, and we were all having coffee and talking about it. And the Methodist minister mentioned that they've just leased out their Sunday school building to the food bank. And I said, well, where are you going to have your Sunday school classes? And he says, we don't have Sunday school classes anymore. He said, we don't have any young people here. He said, the only young person is my daughter.
Oh.
And then he said, we only have about 40 people that come to service on Sunday. And the Episcopal Church and the Lutheran Church are in the same boat to the degree they don't even have enough money to hire ministers.
Wow.
So they don't have ministers. And so here we are. So I had to brag a little bit. And I said, well, it's interesting because I said in Orthodoxy, it's a whole different thing. And I told them about the Montanica that I was speaking at a few years ago. And I said, of the 150 registered for Montanica retreat in Butte, Montana, 95% were young men.
Mm-hmm.
And this monastery, I started a brotherhood, a lay brotherhood years ago called the Salish Brotherhood of St. John the Wonder Worker. And every year we have, like this summer, we had 20 of the young men that were here camping out in our forest, attending the services for the day, eating with the monks in our trapezo, even doing their own nighttime services collectively in our little St. John Chapel every day. And they're pious. One of them wants to be a priest now.
Wow.
And one day, soon after I founded this little organization, I took them into the little village of Vashon to the farmer's market. And I said, we're gonna do something special. I said, I gotta show you this. I said, it's too bad we don't all have matching sunglasses. And one of the young men was a recruiter for St. Catherine's Monastery or St. Catherine's University in Southern California. And he happened to have these sunglasses that he would give out whenever he was talking. So they all look like this. It says St. Catherine's on this side.
Nice.
Here.
Yes.
So he brought them all out and handed them out to everybody. I have a box full of them for any future members. So he brought those out, and we went into the farmer's market, and there were, I think, about 8 of them. And on cue, I put on my sunglasses. And then they all put on their sunglasses, and they got into a half circle in the middle of the market. And one of them started chanting, and they all joined in singing a hymn to the Holy Virgin.
How cool.
And people were grabbing their phones and filming it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to a place called the Hardware Store Restaurant. It used to be an old hardware store.
Mm-hmm.
We went in there and we put a bunch of tables together, and we all ordered a stein of beer. And the cue was going to be when everybody was half down with their stein of beer, these guys would stand up and go to the far end of the restaurant and do the same thing. And even the owner of the restaurant came out from the kitchen to film it with their phone. And then we went to the Thriftway grocery store, and we did it again in the entrance to the grocery store. And a few days later, I was in that restaurant having a cup of coffee with a friend, and this waitress came over, and she says, I can't believe it. She said, we live on an island where none of the young people are religious at all. None of them go to church at all. And then I witnessed all of these handsome young men standing and singing a hymn. I couldn't believe it. Well, that's orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm.
It's orthodoxy. And it's a place of refuge in an age when young men, when I was in college, 70% of college students were men. Now they're about 40%.
Mm.
And young men don't feel welcome in colleges.
Right.
And then to add to the insult to injury, they are all made to feel guilty for their white privilege.
Yeah.
I mean, it is wacko.
Yes.
I mean, and then what we do to Black people, we essentially treat them as though, well, unless we give you lots of government support, you'll never amount to anything.
Yes.
I mean, my gosh, Father Turbo and Father Moses Berry, who are two dear friends, especially Moses Berry, he's got a son on the island. And, so Father Moses and his wife come here when they can. They're just two examples of Black men who have succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
But our whole nation is filled with people like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to make them look like, oh, well, they can't do it unless they have public support, it's ridiculous. And then we demonize the people that should be their equals.
Yes.
I had a black uncle when I was growing up because one of my my uncle divorced his wife, and she married a black man. And, this was in Spokane in the 50s. And my dad and mom sat me down and they said, we know how much you love your aunt. We're not going to walk away from her because of the divorce. Now you have another uncle. So I grew up with an Uncle Wally who was a black man. It's like, this is who we are as Orthodox Christians. Our nation isn't America. Our nation is the church.
Right. I know a lot of you guys want to see more beauty in this world, in this culture, because modern art is so degenerate and nihilistic. It does seem that there's a huge need to share the beautiful Christian art. Some artists are working to keep tradition alive. My good friend and friend of the show, Amy Mastrini, Amy the artist, she's been painting for 11 years. She's an Orthodox Christian. She creates icons of Jesus Christ, Mary, the saints, and so on. Her work is done in oil and gold leaf. It's really, really nice. I have some pieces from Amy. It's the perfect opportunity to beautify your home or give a gift to your loved ones for a holiday or a birthday. She sells art prints, stickers, original paintings on her website. Go check it out, amy-the-artist.com. That is amy-the-artist.com. She is currently accepting commissions as well. She says a lot of her work is intended to honor the divine and sacred. How wonderful is that? Go check it out, amy-the-artist.com. Follow her on Instagram at amy_the_artist. Let's get back to the show. There's something I want to ask you about that, and you touched upon it just a while ago when you said, I'm not for Hamas nor for Israel. There's issues on both sides. A lot with this geopolitical thing going on right now, and the Zionism that our government is, unfortunately, a lot of them put forth. I'll tell you something really quick. When my church growing up as a teenager was Pastor John Hagee, who I'm sure you're familiar with, who kind of leads that Zionist charge. I kept hearing when I grew up in this non-denominational Zionist Christian church, I hate to use something that I should have said together there, but I kept hearing God's chosen people, God's chosen people. That's Jewish people. It says in the Bible, it's God's chosen people. And I've learned since then that that's not the case. And I've heard you articulate it very beautifully on who exactly the chosen people are. Could you explain that for people in case there's any people that hear all these things on the news and they get confused on Israel and what's going on?
Well, this whole idea of the Jewish people being the chosen people really originated from a Protestant church, Plymouth Brethren, I believe. That's where it originated, this whole idea. But if we look at the New Testament, the Christ came to the Jews, and they rejected him, and they crucified him. And there was a small group of the Hebrew people that recognized him as the Messiah. And when the majority rejected him and demanded his crucifixion, that was when the doors were open to the Gentiles. And it was at that moment that the Jews and the Gentiles who recognized Christ as the Messiah became together the chosen people. The Orthodox Church is the chosen people. This isn't anti-Semite.
Right.
And then we got to also remember that that Hamas, the Palestinians and the Jews are Semites, all of them. So it's not like, oh, well, I'm an anti-Semite if I'm not pro-Jew. I'm pro. I love my Jewish friends. I have lots of Jewish friends. I haven't had the privilege of knowing a lot of Palestinians in my life. I've known a few and I've really liked them. And I've even had some Muslim friends. But the point is that Jesus is the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us who recognize Jesus as the Messiah, as our Savior, are the chosen people.
Right. Well put. Father Seraphim Rose wrote the book called Nihilism, and he was writing it around the time, I think, when maybe you were in the Bay Area, and I assume you at least felt this spirit of nihilism. Do you think that's what we're in now?
I'm much a nihilist.
I'm sorry?
I was very much a nihilist.
And he called that the age of nihilism. Do you think we're in that now? Are we past that? Are we worse than nihilistic?
I think we're worse.
Okay.
I think we're worse. Yeah. I think that the basis of the corrupt nature that we're experiencing spiritually and politically right now comes out of nihilism. But, and a lot of it is, again, when my friend Jerry didn't get tenure because of his looks, essentially. And I would have. I mean, I wore bow ties and sport coats and, trimmed brown beard, in case anybody's wondering, and short hair. And I looked the part. I was a professional looking guy. But when I look at the terrible destruction of this nation that we're witnessing right now, I have a friend who's a former general of the Army. He was the head of the Pentagon during the Nixon administration. And Joe lives on the island. Joe told me a number of years ago, before COVID even, he told me that he said that the United States is more divided now than it was at the beginning of the Civil War.
Mm.
And that, now after all those years have passed, it's even worse.
Mm-hmm.
Our country is absolutely divided. To the degree that I have personally lost a lot of close friends because they read what I posted or seen my videos, and they don't want anything to do with me now.
Mm.
And I'm seeing this all over. And I'm hearing, I have relatives that don't even speak to one another because of this divide.
Mm-hmm.
I speak to all of them. I'm not going to let any, I'm one of these that if somebody's going to cut me off, I'll find a way. I'm still reaching out to people. But it's like this is this terrible thing that's happening because the strength of our nation has always been in its diversity. It's not that we're all alike. We can leave that up to Hitler, wanted everybody to be absolutely alike. But that's not who we are. That's what Stalin wanted. And if you weren't going to be conforming to what he thought you should be, then you were executed. And I really believe that we're living in an age like that. What really bothers me, and I'm not a real political person at my core, but when we look back during the presidency of Trump, our economy was thriving. We didn't worry about our sources for oil and gas. There was he was the kind of guy that would say things that would hurt people, like, oh, I can't believe he said it, so on. But he was also one who went to North Korea. And recently, when the president of China came to San Francisco, and much to my horror, somebody sent me a video of the cars driving through San Francisco with all of these red Chinese communist flags flying, no American flags.
Right.
Everybody waving these Chinese flags. And then the president greeting him, trying to grasp his hand. and the president of China knew what he was doing and didn't like it. But here is supposedly this was going to be an attempt to let's have peace between our two nations. And at the very end of the day, the president publicly says the guy's, dictator.
Dictator, right.
I mean, really? Do we need to be told that he's a dictator? Don't you think that maybe you should not have said that? But his cognitive abilities have slipped so badly, and he's saying things. But even if Trump wins the next election, I don't think these people will allow him to take a seat. And I even think that there's a good possibility that we're going to be into such a war before the election that the elections will be canceled to keep the powers that be in the White House there, including the puppeteer who's running Biden. Now, I've said a lot there.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I'll get you out of here soon. I have found in the last few years when the worst and crazier things got. I should preface this for yourself and any of my audience who's new and doesn't know this. I was an atheist for probably about year 2000 till I came to Orthodoxy in 2021. And so as things got worse, as it felt like the vice grips were tightening on society and culture, it happened in communism. With communism too, you can find orthodoxy through these tough times. That's how I found it. What would you say to people listening that think it seems like they could feel, pessimistic about the future? It feels like they're feeling nihilistic about everything. There's no meaning anymore. There's no hope, even if you vote. That are curious about looking for something true and real and what the Orthodox Church can offer. What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, start your day with Monastery blend coffee. You know what it really is? That as an Orthodox Christian, regardless of what I see around me, when I first heard about the Black Lives Matter organization being founded, and I immediately knew from my background what that was about, and I went online and I discovered that these women, the three women that founded Black Lives Matter, are self-declared Marxists and lesbians. And recently I found out that they're all witches.
Oh, of course.
And I wasn't surprised. And then when Antifa was tearing up Portland and burning every night in the streets, big fires, and attacking the police, and essentially breaking the windows and looting stores, the first thing I thought of is this is what we were working for when I was with the Socialist Workers Party.
Yep.
Years ago, I was driving back from San Francisco and I stopped into a grocery store to pick up a bag of chips and a soda for the road. And on my way out, there was a woman standing there handing out leftist leaflets. And I recognized her.
Oh.
And I went up to her and I said, "Oh, I haven't seen you in years. How have you been?" And she looked at me and she says, "Who are you?" Because I'm in my robes. And I told her who I had been. And she said, "Well, what are you?" And I told her I'm an Orthodox monk. And she said, "We all wondered whatever happened to you," because she was on the Central Committee with me. And then she said, "Well, when the revolution starts, we're coming for you."
Wow.
And I said, "Well, let me know and I'll bake a cake." But a few years ago, I was driving up the Oregon coast and I stopped in Lincoln City to gas up, and I went into the convenience store. And on my way out, there's a young man there, bearded young man in blue jeans and a sport coat. And he came up to me and he said, "Are you Abbot Tryphon?" Well, I assumed he must be somebody that reads my blogs or follows me. And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "The revolution has started. We're coming for you."
Whoa.
So I mentioned it to a sheriff friend of mine, because I had put in 18 years as a sheriff's chaplain.
Right.
And I mentioned it to this sheriff friend of mine. And I said, "What do you make of this?" And he said, "Well, you're a very public person with your blogs and your videos. And he said, anybody that follows you or comes across you knows who you are, what you look like, and where you live. And this is true. But, I just recently had my casket built.
Mm.
I have a beautiful casket that a young man built for me,
Okay.
sitting up on the porch of our veranda, ready for use. I did that because I didn't want my monks to have to scramble to get a casket made for me when my day comes. But at the root of who I am, with all that I know about what's happening out there, and Antifa, when that was going on in Portland, and knowing exactly what our plan had been, and I'm seeing it implemented all over the country. This stuff with rallying against Israel and on the side of Hamas, it's beyond just being between Muslims and Jews. This is leftist politics.
Mm-hmm.
And Israel isn't really even a religious state. The majority of people in Israel are not religious Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the religious Jews that I have known are not even pro-Israel.
Right.
So this is something beyond that. And so what I see happening out there, I know from my own personal experience what the plan has been all along. But I am grounded in my faith in Jesus Christ. And I am grounded in the knowledge that I have eternal life ahead of me. And that no matter what these idiots do out there, look at what happened with the Russian Revolution. 70 years of Bolshevik revolution, where bishops and priests and monks were slaughtered and churches were burned or confiscated. And now Russia is an Orthodox country,
Yes.
thriving, with more churches being built on a daily basis, while in the United States, we're closing churches, we're tearing them down to build high-rises, or we're turning them into coffee houses or bookstores or bars. I mean, the difference. But this is where it gives me great solace to know that my nation is orthodoxy,
Mm-hmm.
and that I have the saints behind me,
Mm-hmm.
and that all of this that is happening is nothing new.
Right.
So whether this is the apocalyptic time that is coming, or whether it's just a period of time of decline for a once great nation that still thinks it's a superpower,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, I am in the bosom of the church.
Well
And
put.
and with my Pentecostal friends, I'll feel a hallelujah coming on.
Yes. Now we get to the time where we can plug anything you'd like, including that coffee. I think from a friend of mine did a podcast and he advertised some beard oil that you guys might have there, but anything you'd
Father
like.
Martin, our Father Martin makes a beard oil, which I use. Too late, because my beard used to be massive. And so once I realized it was getting shorter and somebody suggested I use a beard oil, and Father Martin saw the bottle, he says, "Oh, I can make this."
Mm-hmm.
So we have a beard oil. He makes the best soaps, natural soaps you could imagine. We have a coffee company, Monastery Blend Coffee. All of this, you can go, abbottryphon.com, and
It'll
that
have
will with everything.
Perfect.
So we have an online gift shop bookstore, and then also Tuesdays through Saturdays we have open house from 1:30 to 4:30 those days. When Mondays is our desert day, we call it. So we're
Okay.
closed to visitors, but the rest of the time we're open to visitors. So if anybody's local, they're always welcome to come. And
Okay.
and also email the monastery if you have prayer requests, and we'll put you on the list for commemorations. And And just also know that old Abbot Tryphon loves you.
Excellent. That's a nice way to close out. Could we get you to close out with a quick prayer?
Lord Jesus Christ, our God, we give thanks to you. And we know that we are in your loving arms. And we place ourselves, our friends, our relatives, and even our nation in your loving hands, and ask your mercy upon all of us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much, Abbot Tryphon. What an interview that was. I'm so honored to have been able to have Abbot Tryphon on this show. Thank you so much for doing that, sir. Thank you guys for listening. And this coming week, or as this drops, it's Thanksgiving week, but the following week is when we're going to have our special Zoom meeting for the club. If you're in it, it's going to be a good time. I haven't announced the exact date, but it will be next week, basically, the week after this Thanksgiving. And to get into that club, it's patreon.com/counterflow, $5 or more per month. Get you in, and you'll be invited to this Zoom call. It's not recorded. It's not posted. It will be you, me, and a special guest. And it's always a good time. The group, it's almost becoming like a fun little monthly family meeting. You know, I get to see these people, chat with them. They're super supportive. They're honestly super smart, much smarter than I. So I'm glad to do that every month. As for the show, counterflowpodcast.com, subscribe to the YouTube page where these drop every Tuesday evening around 7 p.m. Central. Sometimes I'll knock it to 7:30 or 8 if I've got to go out to dinner or something. Because I do that, I'm always in the live chat when they debut, when they premiere, when they drop. Whatever the kids say these days, I'm always in the live chat, and I love interacting with you guys. It's great. Follow me on Twitter, @BuckRebel, BuckRebel, where you can find the latest updates to my feud with Twisted Sister's own Dee Snider. I hate the phrase, if you know, you know, but I guess it's appropriate here. Until next week, you guys have a good one. See ya.
You get split in half, but I call him the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.